Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Speak Plainly podcast, where we speak plainly about things that matter. I am your host, Owl Medicine, and today's topic is narcissism and narcissistic fathers, narcissistic mothers, just narcissism in general. But we're going to be talking about a few things in particular that have been happening in my life, because as most of you know, if you've been following, my best friend got a cancer diagnosis, and she recently passed. It has been very difficult for me, but I am moving along, but I am choosing to keep things moving, and this is part of that. I wanted to talk about Key and the amazing changes that I've gone through as a result of my time with her at the end of her life. But it's a little too raw. So I decided that I'm just going to talk about one particular aspect of the things that she has brought me. This whole process of writing the book and putting out a podcast and building Decolonize Healthcare and dealing with Key and her cancer diagnosis has been a lot happening all at once. But it's been really cool how synergistic it's all been. And Key specifically has done some really powerful things for me. Not the least of which is to get me to actually talk to my father. So, my father, I didn't know was a narcissist. That's a recent thing, just in the last few months. Yeah, sure, he had some narcissistic tendencies, and let's start this conversation off by saying narcissistic tendencies and narcissistic personality traits is not the same thing as narcissistic personality disorder. There's a list of traits that add up to, if you get a certain score of the certain traits, then you essentially can be diagnosed with narcissist personality disorder, but that is a very, very rare person. So we're not talking about disorders today. We're talking about the run-of-the-mill narcissism that is kind of in the zeitgeist everybody's talking about, which is not the same, but we're rolling with the social definition because, frankly, that's the most real definition. I don't care what Webster says. Whatever the social definition of a word is tends to be more true, just because that's the way people use it. So we're using social definitions of narcissism, not narcissistic personality disorder. And we're looking specifically, this situation with my father really helped unlock a lot of cool stuff for me. So we'll dive into a few of the recognitions that have come up as a result of this. But let's start with, I wanted to get a hold of my father, and I didn't know why. I really didn't have any idea why. I got a hold of my sister and was like, hey, do you have Bruce's number? Could you give me Bruce's number? And she was like, yeah, I'm surprised you want to talk to him. I'm like, yeah, me too. But she gave me his phone number, and I waited a couple of weeks. I think it's actually a little over a month. I waited about a month before I wound up sending him anything at all. And when I did, I still wasn't even sure what I wanted. I was very emotionally charged when I sent the message. But the first one was just a, hey, got your number from my sister type thing. And the reason I was emotionally charged is because I was down in Renton about to do a chemo appointment with Key. And it just felt right. And so I did it. And trust me, it's weird. If you have a narcissist in your family, you know you want fucking nothing to do with them, period. You know that there's no good that can come out of a relationship with a narcissist, period. It's just not a healthy thing. So, and I wrote him off a long time ago, and he hadn't been a second thought for me for years, like a decade. But still, it didn't matter. I had this desire, I had this impetus to keep pushing and to get a hold of him for some reason. I didn't know why, but I trust myself. I trust my process. Even if I don't understand it, I've learned so far in my life that I can trust my process, that whatever it is that I wind up doing, at some point I look back and go, oh, that was why. So I've learned to trust my process. So I leaned into the process and I went, all right, I'll message this guy. I did. He messaged back. He called back. He called me while I was driving back. I didn't answer. We had just had chemo wound up being turned down because her labs were too low. She was in too bad a shape to get chemotherapy. So it was a rough day. But his voicemail, he told me that this was about the time that he got off work every day, which was like 3 o'clock or something. So I waited until the next day. We messaged a few times just back and forth. And then I waited till the next day. And when he got off about the same time, I sent him a message. He sent me one back, and I was like, cool, he's around and available. I know he just got off of work. And I sent these messages. I just started typing. So I'm going to read you some of these text messages because this is all really, really, really important. If you were raised by a narcissist, you have some serious psychological complexes to deal with. You're going to have some issues, and that's just the result of being raised by a narcissist. We'll get a little down the road why I think that this is more applicable than just to narcissists because of a whole generational thing that happened a few decades ago, but we'll get into that toward the end. When I messaged Bruce, I said, so really, I don't know what to say outside of I'm at an age where I recognize that you were at this age during my formative years. Every parent tries to do better than their parents. I believe that's true for you too. To that end, I want to say that I'm sorry for whatever you went through when you were young. I know your father not being around much hurt you deeply. I appreciate all the years that you were there for me to take me to quartet practices and to singings. I remember how hard you tried to do better. I remember you saying to me that you can only learn so much from what not to do. And you couldn't have been more right. So I wanted to say thank you for all the years that you invested in me, my music especially. The accidental damage done by Lynn from one specific conversation about my musical ability stunted my desire to pursue music too profoundly for me to ever really consider it again the way I once had, but I'm working through that too. As a kid, we agree to and believe lots of things that we don't have the capacity to capture the intent behind. One of my greatest gifts in this life has been my mind. I was born with a soft heart. Probably too soft for this world, and it's been my mind that has helped me. To me, that's plainly traceable to you. Mom's a lot of things, and intellectual is not one of them. You, on the other hand, taught me how to think, and that's the greatest gift a man could teach his son. You may not have liked the conclusions I came to, but that's life. You did the right thing there as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of baggage between us, a lot of bullshit, frankly. But that, too, is what it is. And keep in mind, I didn't write any of this beforehand. All of these I wrote in Messenger and sent them as they came. And when I was finished writing all of it and I'd sent the last message, I called a good friend and read what I had sent to her because I was so dysregulated by the end of this that I wasn't quite sure what I had said. But I knew I needed to address this with my highest self. I knew that whatever I was about to do, I needed to really bring my best self. And that's what I tried to do here. Then I went on to say, 4 or 5 years ago, I spent 4 days trying to perfect a message to you. My first one in many years. I was so proud of it. I knew ahead of time that there was one line in it that would piss you off, and I was right. You ignored the point of the entire message, which was to say that I turned out pretty fucking great. Not even turned out, actually, but hand-carved the aspects I wanted to see in myself, and I forced myself to live them until I became them. A trait that I'm proud of, and I think I probably got from you. The point being, though, if you got to know me, you might think I was pretty swell too. And your response, as I remember it, was, "So you think you're God, huh?" Now, breaking from the quotes, in that message, I told him I was a God standing in my own power. And I knew he wasn't going to like that, but back to the messages, I said, it stung that I spent days trying to get it just right, but also to be honest and have the true purpose of that message ignored completely. Even though I knew it probably would ahead of time, it still hurt. I almost immediately replied with John 10:34, but I chose not to pursue because you clearly seemed not at all interested. And in the messages, I didn't bother saying what John 10:34 is because my father has an associate's degree in Bible doctrine and theology, and so that's something that he should know or would be willing to look up, and it was one of my little nods. I was kind of proud of that because John 10:34 says, "Is it not written in your laws?" Right, by the way, words written in red, words from Jesus himself. "Is it not written in your laws that I have said, ye are gods?" But he ignored that. I said, and then back to the messages. At any rate, this is what I want to talk about, or through, or whatever. You've been out of my life entirely for so long that you're no longer a father to me. If I try to view you as such, I am flooded with your failures and all the emotions that go along with it. When I view you as a confused child who also happened to have children, it's a much more fair playing field. So I suppose that this is my olive branch? ? I don't actually desire to have your presence in my life. I probably never will. Yet I also don't have any desire to resist it, which is new, and I think is the point. I've reached a place in myself in which I can forgive you for your failings, and aka humanness. None of it was about me. It was always about you and your worldview. So now, it's entirely up to you. You get to decide if you want to be in the life of a person like me. You helped to create, nurtured, raised, and then abandoned because of sexuality or whatever other reasons you had. But all that is on you. Your choice, your responsibility. Just know, I don't bow to anyone. Irreverence is a hallmark of my personality. And then in parentheses, also most likely thanks to you, LOL. No man, no God. I won't cater to your preferences or pretend to be anything other than myself. I will be me, all of me, the big, the flamboyant, the real, the honest, the intelligent, the sensitive, the powerful, all of it. That's me. I do hope for some reason, probably biologically, that you will accept this in whatever way, but expect very little beyond a text back. Like I said, it's up to you. I know it's a lot to chew on. I know that you just got off of work, so take your time and we can have an actual conversation in the future, not just a text. That was very hard for me to write. It was very hard for me to write, especially when the context is brought up of I was abandoned or kicked out or whatever you want to call it. He don't like me because I'm gay. He don't like me for a lot of reasons, but he definitely doesn't like me because I'm gay. We have a lot of issues because of that. There was a lot that my father did wrong. We haven't talked for a decade for reasons, for good reasons. Like, we didn't need to talk about those because those, like, They have been aired. That's why we haven't talked for 10 years. But I've gotten to a place in my life where I've fucked up too, on more than one occasion. And I've had to eat my words, and I've had to own it. I've had to own my fuck ups. And it felt good to own my fuck ups. It felt really good. It sucked at first, but once it was over, the life that I have post owning my fuck ups is way better. And although there was very little energy given to this wall that separated my father and I, because I never thought about him. He lives forever away. There's no conversation. There's no love lost. There's no love there. But I felt like I wanted to give him that same kind of peace. And although I used very little energy to hold that wall up because he wasn't standing on the other side, it still took some energy, and that energy was pretty wasted. And now it doesn't, because I no longer have the desire to resist him in my life if he were to want to be a part of it. And I didn't know that. I didn't know any of this when I started talking, and that's part of what was so crazy. This is why I'm really big on journaling. And even just talking out loud, talking to yourself. Because for me, like, how do you know what you know until you say it? How do you know how you feel until you say it? You know, like I there are things that I know, but quite often I wind up saying things that I didn't realize I knew. And that stuff is helpful. So as I expressed this to Bruce, was also the first time that I was realizing it within myself. So that was very hard because we have a very troubled past. And he didn't answer for 12 days. He ghosted me for 12 days. Oh, the last thing I should remind you of about this, well, you'll get it in the messages. So he didn't answer for 12 freaking days. After that, I said, well, I guess I'll take your silence as a not interested on the 13th day. That's okay. I still hope you enjoy yourself and enjoy your life. Thanks for being my father. Thanks for all the time and lessons. Thanks for the care and love. Take care of yourself, Bruce. I hope you find some peace. And then he responds with, I love you and I always have and always will. We will talk sometime on the phone. Unlike a lot of people, I don't talk or text often. I might talk to Ann once a month for a few minutes. And then he said the most Bruce thing ever, which is, I gave Becca the titles to the grave sites near Bub. One is for you when needed and if you want it. I sent him this stuff and he's like, I bought your grave plot. It's just really funny to me because that is quintessential Bruce-ness. That is so Bruce. So anyway, I'll just read you what happened because this was really cool. 12 days, Bruce. You had 12 days to respond to your only living son. And you didn't bother to text back until I messaged again. I also know that you text with Rebecca, my sister, regularly. So I know that you do talk and text. And even if you didn't, one would hope that a series of heartfelt messages from one's estranged son might warrant a more timely response. I'm honestly disappointed in you. I thought you'd have handled it more adult. Have a good day. Enjoy yourself. We all deserve more peace. And then a little bit later, I sent again, because I was like, that was a little harsher than I wanted it to be. I said, the invitation still stands. If you ever want to talk, we can. But do not lie to me like you did today. Don't hide your fear-driven actions or needing time to integrate new information. Be 100% upfront and honest, and there's a good chance it'll be a peaceful and pleasant exchange. I have very little patience for excuses. Be well, Bruce. I mean it. Be well. Then he says to me, this is where the narcissism really makes it out in full blast. He goes, sorry you thought it was a lie. It wasn't. Take care of yourself. So that's what we call gaslighting. Yeah, there's gaslighting. There's the perfect example. Here's how you handle it. I said, either you lied or you're saying that Rebecca lied when she told me that you text regularly. So which is it, Bruce? Rebecca lied to me or you did? Because that's what gaslighters do. Narcissists gaslight because they can't be wrong. So then they tell you that you're wrong. And then you start to question your own senses. Never again, bitch. Never again. So he responds, regularly doesn't mean often. Now you have used my first name too many times. So if dad's not good enough for you, then you don't need to have me in your life. Go live the best life you can. Enjoy what you can while you can. To which I responded, okay, I will. So that was a conversation with a narcissist. A conversation with my narcissistic father, whom I just recently found out is actually narcissistic, but not actually narcissistic. He does not have narcissistic personality disorder. Far from it. He does have a lot of narcissistic tendencies. This is important because these narcissistic tendencies cause serious damage to the children who are raised in that dynamic. What happened is, a little after this, I also got a hold of my cousin and talked with my cousin about this stuff. And she was very proud of me. She told me it was soft, it was dark words on a soft pillow. And I loved that. I loved the imagery of it. It was beautiful. But what she pointed out was that when I refused to let him take control of the narrative, and I called him out and expressly brought up exactly what his lie was and wouldn't let him gaslight me, he freaked out. He freaked out. My father, in my head, never freaks out. Now, the father that I have in my head is like 10 years old, 20 years old now, right? He's 30 something instead of the 50, 60 something that my father is now. Because in my head, my father is still experientially the same person that he was when I was around him last, when I was a child. And when I was a child, I looked up to many things about my father. Despite all the bad, there were good things in there too. Same with my mother. There were bad and good things about both my mother and my father. And I'm pretty sure you probably have the same type of situation. There were traits in your mother and father, or whoever raised you. Some were good, some were bad. And you did your best to not perpetuate the bad ones. And we do our best to emulate the good ones. For me, the good things that I saw in my father were self-control. It was not jumping to conclusions. It was rational, logical evaluation. It was his ability to command respect with just his presence. Those were all things that were good about my father. And the reason I didn't know he fit this narcissistic profile is because of religion. And this is a really big point today. If you were raised in a very religious household, like I was, even part-time, like I was raised mostly by my mother once they got divorced, which happened when I was fairly young. Even though my mother had primary custody, the amount of time I spent with my father was also very formative. And he was extremely religious. And when you're raised with that much religion, it's not your parents you have to be perfect for. It's God. It's Jesus. They outsource all of the same attributes of narcissism, and then they outsource the blame to God. So in my situation, it wasn't that I needed to be perfect to gain my father's approval. It was that I needed to be perfect to gain God's approval. That there was an authority higher than my father and higher than my mother. And unless I did exactly what my father told me, because he was the middleman and the authority between me and God that could help me to figure things out because I was a small child. So it was still his rules. But if I didn't obey them, it wasn't that I was disobeying him. It was that I was disobeying God. And that's seriously screwed up. This conversation hurt. It hurt quite a bit. But only for a little bit, because I knew exactly how it was going to end, right? Like, I knew it was going to be this way. I knew my father, and I decided to give it a try anyway. I knew that it was going to just end terribly, and nothing great was going to happen, but I did know that I had to try anyway. Well, it turns out I was kind of wrong. Even though I knew exactly how it was going to end, something amazing did happen. So there's a lot of articles now that you can find in about what happens to children who grow up with narcissists, with a narcissistic parent, whether that's an actual narcissist or the pseudo narcissism that like my father had, which I think is much more common. But there's these lists of traits in our personalities that show up in the children as a result of being raised by a narcissist. And here's a few of them for you. One is indecision and guilt. We're constantly racked with indecision and guilt because we've been trained to consider the parents' needs and feelings first and foremost. So we're not allowed to have our own needs. And if we do, we can't entertain our own needs without feeling selfish for doing so. The next is internalized gaslighting. You don't even need your narcissist to gaslight you anymore because you'll do it to yourself. Going up with a narcissistic parent can leave an adult child feeling like you have nothing to offer at all, which is probably not true. And growing up, your talents and skills may have been downplayed, ignored, or co-opted by the narcissistic parent who felt threatened by the child's skills, because narcissistic parents don't have children. They have tiny little extensions of themselves. I talk about children as tiny extensions of ourselves as a way that, like, parents, there definitely is this tendency of certain unresolved things that are happening in the parent seem to get personified in the children, but that's not at all what we're talking about here. There's a lot of this imposter syndrome that comes from the internalized gaslighting. We also have issues with love and loyalty, where we'll get a little bit of love and we just throw all of our loyalty on it because loyalty was the only way to get the narcissist to pay any attention to us and to keep us safe. And very often we have an incredible ability to show compassion and love for others. We have a lot of strength and resilience in that way, and we're able to form like really, really loving relationships. But that is hard, and it does happen later on in life, because those relationships are very hard to get balanced because of the indecision and the guilt and the internalized gaslighting. Another thing that you probably have if you were raised by a narcissist is chronic self-blame. This is one that is really kind of frustrating. Whether or not the parent is actually like openly abusive, they're almost always like emotionally tone deaf. They're always preoccupied with themselves and their own concerns, which means they don't hear your pain as a child. They don't hear it. So then, in order to maintain the family unit, the child, even though you're an adult now, still shies away from blaming the parents and instead takes all the blame on themselves. If I was better at blah, 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 if I wasn't such difficult blah, 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 if I weren't so weak, then you would have been able to do whatever. There's always a reason to blame you. And the reason is because if you blame the narcissist, you're not safe. Because in a world where everyone is either right or wrong, guess what a narcissist is? Right. Which means you are wrong. Anything that you say, think, or do that's not exactly in line with the narcissist makes you wrong. There's also a lot of insecure attachment. This is the, like, when we live through neglect and manipulation and like emotional abuse, or even just absent, it leaves us questioning how safe we are when we're in other people's energies. We're always feeling unsafe because we never got to feel securely attached to our parent, because they were busy being themselves and doing their own thing and not helping us to establish our sense of self in the world. Because again, children of narcissists are not tiny people. They are tiny versions of the narcissist. That's how the narcissist thinks about them. And I'll say it again, this is not just narcissism personality disorder. This is realities for those of us who are raised by people with narcissistic tendencies, who don't have and don't need to have a diagnosis in order to be damaging. So, like, when I started looking at like what happens to the kids of narcissistic parents, I was like, holy shit. I got a lot of like weird things in my own head, and I've explored a lot of the diagnoses and different ways of looking at it and systematizing it and all of that. But this one hit really dead on, and I was surprised because I'd never considered Bruce to be a narcissist. It was always the religion. It was always the religion that he outsourced the narcissism to. So that's what happened when I went toe to toe with my narcissistic father. It was a one-off thing, and it was a big challenge. It was a challenge, but I'm very, very, very glad that I did it, because as poorly as the conversation went, the actual results of it, my God, have been amazing. Because suddenly, like, what happened is I went toe-to-toe with my father with my highest self, right? Like, I took my best, most generous, most forgiving, most loving self, my highest absolute self, and was like, hey, the bad you did may have outweighed the good, but it doesn't negate it. So I want to stand here as a man and tell you, thank you for the good. And that can be the start of something. I said that. What I got back was garbage. But that's totally fine, because I approached it with my best self. And this is why we have to approach things with our best self. The things that are really important to us anyway, we have to approach with our best self. Because if we do approach it with our best self, then no matter how the actual event goes, the ripples from that event are beautiful. They really are. So here's some of my ripples. A few days after this, I started to think about my long-term plans with the book. And I love thinking about that kind of stuff, but there's always a bit of like, that goes along with it, because it's really important and it's very scary and all those other things, right? But a lot of that was gone. And now there's less pressure. The pressure to accomplish is much less. The pressure to do is still there, because one, I grew up in a capitalist society, and I like to be useful, and I like working and doing stuff and making stuff, and that's all great. But the need is gone, and that is the fundamental shift, because at the center of all of our psychological problems as anybody who identifies as broken or raised by a narcissist or whatever. We all have somewhere inside of us these, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, fast enough, strong enough, the blank enough, whatever. You fill in your blank, whatever crap that you judge yourself on. You're not blank enough. The problem with these things is you're not blank enough for what? There's no context. There's nothing specific enough to make these things actionable, which would make them useful. So instead, it's just a belief that we have that makes us feel bad that isn't actually useful or functional. But I realized when all of this pressure lifted, there is a context for it. And it's so fucking obvious. But the I'm not good enough, it's literally I'm not good enough for my parents. I'm not good enough for my family. I'm not good enough for my place of origin. That's all it is, because that's where it started, right? And it echoes and it changes as we change and as we go through life and we have these different experiences, and they change us from degree to degree to degree. But ultimately, foundationally, it always traces back to I'm not good enough for my parents, for this situation. And I'm really happy that I knew the good things that I wanted to imitate in my father, because I'd been working on them for years. And it wasn't until I went toe-to-toe with him, which was so bizarre to even want to do, like I said, but it wasn't until I did that I realized I am better than him in every goddamn way. Every single fucking one of them. Unless you think not cursing is like, that's a thing that makes it better. But fuck that. So for me, I'm literally better than him in every way now. And I know this now. I was already better than him because I didn't diddle children. I'm not on my fourth wife. I'm not a narcissist. I'm not a self-righteous asshole. I'm not any of these things. Like I don't abandon people because of my religion. Like I'm not a zealot in that way. There's a lot of reasons I'm already better than him, because I don't do the shitty things that I knew he did. But there were really, really powerful things that I looked up to my father for that had slipped off of my radar because he had been off of my radar for so long. I assumed he didn't matter anymore. I really did. And turns out this biological connection is really that damn strong, because it wasn't until I did face him on this, and then because I brought my best self and he brought his regular self, I realized that, oh, wow, I actually did surpass him many moons ago. And suddenly, I don't feel the need to accomplish big things to prove my worth. That whole not good enough is not good enough for my parents, not good enough for them. But now I've realized I am good enough. The way that we become good enough is to be better than. But we're always trying to be better. We want to get better. We want to be better, but better than what? Right? Like we're always missing context. We're so inspecific. Better than what? For me, it was better than my father. There are things about him I looked up to that I wanted to be better than, and I am. I have more self-control. I proved it in that conversation. I have more rational ability to evaluate a situation, see what's happening, and respond as I choose to respond, and not just responding with whatever my emotion tells me I should at that moment, which is what he did when he goes, "Well, now you used my first name too many times." Like, okay, well, all right, game over. That was done. That was easy. I'm better than that. Oh, God, I wish you could feel what I feel right now when I say that. I'm better than that. I am better than that. I am better than him. I really am. And that is what has switched things. I was never good enough. But now, not being good enough has switched into I am better than. And I wouldn't have known it had I not gone toe-to-toe with my father. And I didn't even know why. I didn't know it was a toe-to-toe. I thought I was extending out some niceness for no reason at all. And it was very confusing. And I did dish out niceness. And it was confusing. And it wasn't a reason at all, logically, because I didn't get any benefit from it, from the conversation. via him, but I got massive benefit out of it as a whole. And this is what we have to do with our narcissist people in our life. They're going to be narcissistic. That's all they know how to do. It's a self-protection mechanism. And this brings me to the much larger point. After talking about this with a few friends, I realized that replace narcissist with like a bad temper, and you actually get a lot of the same dynamics happening in a family. So what happens to create narcissism, or these pseudo narcissistic people? Well, I mean, right after we had the greatest generation, right? The World War II, followed by Vietnam, where all of the men in the country were gone. They were shipped off and they were drafted, and then came back, and they came back all fucked up, and then more went to war. And this time, the half that stayed back hated the half that left, and there was this massive polarization in the culture at the time. And then those people all had children. So after the war, where there was this power vacuum created, and the women had to go to work, and the men left for war and came back, and they were all fucked up, and everything was crazy. We needed to rebuild the country. And that was the conversation that people were having. This is when labor unions really started picking up again. And this is when ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? This was a time when the culture was geared toward supporting the country. And at the time, people like my father and his father were told with no uncertain terms that if you wanted to be a man, if you wanted to do the right thing, if you wanted to help, and this was before the internet or before any of that, it was all like everyone was still very much on their own, and the only information that you had was the information that you were given. Right? So if you wanted to be a good husband, a good father, a good friend, a good neighbor, you needed to do certain things and act and behave in certain ways. You needed to be strong. You needed to be resilient. You needed to know what to do. You needed to be decisive. You needed to make a decision and stick to it. And for when people try to do that and aren't quite sure, they wind up having to patch over the insecurity, the unsureness, with false confidence. And that's exactly what narcissism is. So in a way, that what part of this taught me is that my father, just like every other father in the world, is a product of their raising. And what raises us is not just our parents, but it is also the culture that our parents live in and the times that our parents live in. And so there was an entire generation of men who were raised that in order for you to be a good man, you needed to essentially be functionally a narcissist. So what happens when those narcissists come back from war? Or fuck the narcissist, you're just angry. Say you're just mad. Say you aren't quite a narcissist, you're just really angry. I mean, functionally, it comes out fairly much the same, but let's get into why. So in narcissism, if that narcissist has a family, you get what's called a narcissistic family structure. And in every narcissistic family structure, there are certain roles. You have a narcissist, and then you have a group of enablers, essentially. And all those enablers wind up with enmeshment trauma, where everybody has to feel, think, believe, and act the same. Otherwise, you risk pissing off the narcissist or the alcoholic or whatever, the guy with the bad temper, the mom with the bad temper, whatever it is. But there's one person who's volatile, and everyone else has to placate the one volatile person. And then there's inevitably one person who gets old enough that when they get old enough, they go, yo, this shit's fucked up. You're fucked up, to the narcissist or whoever that unsafe person is. And now suddenly that person gaslights them, and the whole family turns their back on the person who's going, yo, this is messed up. And that person becomes the scapegoat in a narcissistic family structure. Anytime there's a narcissistic family structure, there's always enablers and a scapegoat. One interesting thing that is happening right now, to me anyway, is that one of the coolest things you can be right now is a black sheep. And I think the reason is this is the first time that we have had culturally multiple black sheep in each family. And I know that sounds weird. There's usually just one, but here's why. You'd have that whole culture, right? This whole generation of pseudo-narcissists that were created because of the aftermath, really largely the economic needs created by the aftermath of World War II and Vietnam. You have all of these pseudo-narcissists who start their families, and everybody enables except for the black sheep. The black sheep then leaves. But the family structure is still there, and there's still one person who is volatile. And so eventually, they'll still talk shit on the black sheep who left. But eventually, there are new problems because the narcissist is still a narcissist. The volatile person is still a volatile person. And then they have to find a new scapegoat. When they do find a new scapegoat, that new scapegoat also becomes a black sheep of the family. And then 5 or 10 years down the road after the first black sheep, the second one goes, yo, they tried the same shit on me. They're the ones who are fucked up, right? It's not us. And we go, yeah, it was them the whole time. Which is why we have this massive culture now of people who strongly identify with being the black sheep. It's not even because we're all that different. It's because we were the ones saying, hey, that there's a problem with this narcissist or with this volatile person, and I'm not going to cater to enabling this volatile person anymore. That put everyone else in the family in an unsafe position. So the whole family will turn their back on the first outcast, and then sometimes even the second, depending on how big the family is. So if you were raised by a narcissist or know somebody who was, I'm sure, give it a Google. Look up the impacts of growing up or being an adult child of a narcissistic parent. Just Google those keywords, adult child of a narcissistic parent, and find some stuff, because wow, it is powerfully informative and freeing, because it makes a lot of things make a whole lot of sense. I really hope that you have enjoyed today's podcast. Next time, I was planning on talking about Key this time, and I'm planning on talking about Key and the amazing experience, the amazing, exhausting, powerful experience of losing her, and what that last month or two was like. But it's still very raw for me, so we'll see. This one, I really hope you guys feel a little less alone. I hope if you have that really harsh inner voice that tells you that everything is your fault and you're just paralyzed with indecision, constantly blaming yourself and just always having to be the perfect person, I hope that you feel less alone in this. I really do. Because you aren't alone. There's a lot of us. And part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast is to make sure that people recognize this is a generational thing. You don't need to have, your parent doesn't need to be hospitalized for narcissism. I mean, one, that's not going to happen. Two, these are tendencies. These are just, everything is on this sliding scale. Everything in life is on this sliding scale, and including these narcissistic traits, and everything has a cost. The narcissistic trait is a way to cover up insecurities and provide stability when there is none. That's what it's for. Post World War II, post Vietnam, there was no stability. especially the military people coming back who had so much stability and then were just thrown aside. Everything has a cost. And narcissistic traits are no different. It's just a choice. It's a choice that people made, and most people tend to choose the lesser of two evils. We just don't know what the evil was they chose against. So, with that, I'll end it today. If you've made it this far in the podcast, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate you. If you know someone with a narcissist in their life, send them this podcast. Maybe it'll help. And if you've been listening this far, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you very much for your time. If you like this podcast, consider supporting us on Patreon. And remember, stay blessed and stay uncomfortable.